Welcome everyone to the Player Prop Happy Hour Week 6 edition presented by the 33rd team. I am your host as always, Josh Larky, joined as always by Ryan Reynolds with the shades, Ben Wolby with the Phillies hat, and today we have special guest William Saad, or better known as Dr. Profit. Today, like every day, each of us has brought 3 player prop bets to the table for the Sunday NFL games for Week 6. We will trade off rapid fire, each going through the lines that we took, not only giving the bet itself, but which sportsbook has the best odds that we found, and the reasoning behind the bet. That way you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to tail us as well. Ryan, kick us off with your first bet of the day.
Let's start with Jalen Hurts over 29.5 passing attempts at -115 at DraftKings. Wouldn't surprise me if this one moved in the near future. Beaten this in 4 of 5 games so far, Hurts has. He has at least 37 attempts in each of his last 3 games. That includes decisive wins against the Bucs and Rams. That matters this week because they're a significant favorite against the Eagles. Only game he's fallen under this number, Philly went a little run heavy against the Vikings soft front. On the other side of things, opposing quarterbacks have beaten this number in 4 or 5 games versus the Jets. The only one that didn't, Mac Jones, had 29 attempts. I think this has a high chance of hitting. I've actually put more than 1 unit on it.
I like that play. Guys, if you like the way that Ryan talks about football, you can follow him at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. His expert picks and predictions for every game hit the33rdteam.com yesterday. And what he's betting on specifically in each game will drop tomorrow on the site. Those are both free articles. You should be checking them out. Mr. Wolby, your first bet of the day.
My first bet of the day, Josh Allen's longest completion over 37.5 yards. I grabbed that at -110 on DraftKings. Josh Allen has hit this line in 3 of 5, but he's had 5 total this season, and the Giants have allowed it in 4 of 5, but they've also allowed 5 of these on the season. That's the 3rd most, and teams are passing against the Giants at a bottom 5 rate. But that means that because teams are hitting this at such a high rate, it's actually the team with the 3rd highest hit rate for this prop. So if you use those numbers, you can use something called a binomial distribution, which means that, like, what is the probability of this happening given these odds? It means that Josh Allen would need 21 attempts for this line to be fair value, and he's averaging 35 attempts per game. Obviously, there's a little bit more nuance than just statistics, and not all else is equal. But Josh Allen is second in the number of completions longer than 38 in the NFL as a whole. And the football news, the Giants have run man coverage at the 4th highest rate in the NFL this year. 3 of Allen's 5 completions this long came against man, mostly coming from yak, and the Giants are allowing the 3rd most yak in the NFL.
Sounds pretty good to me. Guys, if you like the way that Ben talks about football, the way that he weaves football intuition and analytics together, well, his projections are up on the 33rdteam.com. His projections are also embedded within my fantasy rankings, which are free on the site. My rest of season rankings and trade value chart is also on the site as well. Doctor, the office is yours. What is your first bet of the day?
Thank you, Josh. My first bet of the day is going to be Kenneth Walker over 67.5 rushing yards. You can get that on DraftKings. And this one's fairly simple. Cincinnati is allowing the highest explosive rush rate in the league, and Kenneth Walker is one of the most explosive rushers in the league. He actually has the 8th highest explosive rush rate in the league among running backs with at least 100 attempts the last 2 years. And he's also gotten at least 17 attempts in 3 of the last 4 games. And if you look at his game log with at least 15 attempts, he's hit this in 8 of 12 career games. So I don't believe in the Cincinnati defensive line in the running game, and Seattle's looked really good. Last week, he played the Giants, who had the 2nd highest explosive rush rate allowed, and he hit this line with ease at 79 yards. He actually hit this with an explosive run in the 4th quarter. Wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of the same this week.
I like the sound of that. Guys, you can follow Will or Dr. Profit at Dr._Profit_ on Twitter. My first bet of the day, let's go with Jerome Ford over 13.5 receiving yards, -115 on DraftKings. Week 2, Jerome Ford ran 19 routes. He caught 3 passes for 25 yards. That's basically double this number. Pierre Strong was second on the team in routes run with 7. Nick Chubb left that game early. He ran 4 routes. So essentially, Ford 19, next best 7. Week 3, Ford ran 21 routes, also topped this number, 2 catches, 33 yards. Next closest to Ford's 21 routes was Hunt at 5. Again, Ford, the pass catching back. Week 4, Jerome Ford, 27 routes. Kareem Hunt was second with only 7. And again, 5 catches, 19 receiving yards. Ford's essentially 3 for 3 on this number since Nick Chubb injury. And not only is he hitting the receiving yards over, but the routes run is 3-4 times that of anybody else on the team. When we look at the Browns quarterback, it's not Deshaun Watson, it's PJ Walker this week. I would expect a very healthy dose of checkdowns against San Francisco. They're going to have to protect PJ Walker in some form. And just in general, this is how teams have played against the Niners. Running backs against San Francisco this year average a 20% target share on the season. They average 8 targets, 6 receptions, and 34 yards a game. 34, quite a bit higher than the 14 yards we need from Mr. Jerome Ford. A running back has hit this over in 4 or 5 games against San Francisco. And as I mentioned before, Ford himself is now 3-0 on the season when he is the starting running back in Nick Chubb's absence. Ryan, I'm going to kick it back to you. Your second bet of the day.
I'm going to go Michael Pittman over 59.5 receiving yards, minus 115 on DraftKings. He's beat this number in 2 of 5 games, but he's been close in the other 2. Generally speaking, when I bet on anything, I'm looking to win by some margin, but when I want to miss small. I think Pittman's one of those things here. His 46 targets are 8th in the league so far. His reception number in this game is 5.5, and the over's juiced to this point, so I leaned with the receiving yards over the receptions. Jags have given up the 9th most receiving yards to wide receivers this season. They've been beaten on the perimeter more so than the slot. Pittman plays the majority of his reps on the perimeter. On opening day, Pittman had 8 catches on 11 targets for 97 yards against Jacksonville. I think Minshew's good for Pittman. The one game Minshew started this year, Pittman saw 11 targets against the Ravens. I like this one too.
That sounds like another good play. Guys, reminder, Ryan Reynolds, NFL on Twitter. Also, if you're not a betting person, but you are a fantasy games person, check out Underdog Fantasy. They just had their first national commercial for the MLB playoffs. Shout out to them. That's very exciting. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy and you want to play some of their fantasy pick'em games, sign up with promo code 33rd, 33RD. You get a 100% deposit match up to $100. So if you put $100 in, you would now have $200 in your account. There's a lot of analogs in the fantasy games market for some of the players we are talking about. I would highly recommend. Keeps us employed, keeps you happy. Underdog Fantasy, promo code 33rd. Ben, your second prop of the day.
I'm going to be taking Kirk Cousins over 33.5 pass attempts, minus 115 on DraftKings. Kirk Cousins has had over 40 attempts in 4 out of 5 games. 40 attempts. The line is 33.5. 4 out of 5 games. The game where he had fewer than 33.5, the Vikings had just 44 plays on 21 minutes time of possession, but they're averaging 61 plays per game. They had 68 plays last week. It was not how they function on offense. And the Bears defense, opponents are averaging 63 plays per game and 35.6 attempts. Those are both actually slightly higher than average numbers. And while only 2 of 5 starting quarterbacks topped this number against the Bears, Mahomes was benched on the hook at 33, so 3 of 5. Teams had enough passing volume to go over this line. And from a football perspective, the concern, and the only concern, is Justin Jefferson is not playing. But still, in the 27-play, small sample size, the Vikings actually were passing the ball more than when he wasn't on the field, 74% versus 70%. And unfortunately, that's just not a number we can look at and see how that fares historically. Heavily skewed towards rushing plays, since Justin Jefferson has never missed a professional game. So if that concerns you, stay away. But I think that this line is a bit reactionary to this news when you consider that the team traded and signed TJ Hawkinson to a rather large contract, and they used a first-round pick on rookie Jordan Addison. Their identity is passing the ball, and I don't think that changes just because Justin Jefferson is out.
Guys, that is talent scout Ben Wolby. He's also a data scientist. He has determined TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, certifiably better than the duo of Alexander Madison and Cam Akers. I'm inclined to agree there. His projections are on the site, along with write-ups on some of his thoughts there, because as many of us know, football projections, it's a mix of pure data with a little bit of intuition. And I'd say that Ben has the data chops. He's got the intuition. Make sure that you check that article out. And his projections, as I mentioned before, funnel into my fantasy rankings, where you get my rankings, Matthew Hill's rankings, and Kev Wheeler's rankings. You get those, the three of us, aggregated and averaged. So as you're looking through the rankings, I think what you'll find each week is that the three of us are going to do just a little bit better than any of us individually. And I think that's pretty good context in general as well. If the three of us are going to be aligned and ahead of consensus on a player, if Ben's going to be ahead of consensus on a player with his projections, probably pretty good players to start in your fantasy lineups. Prophet, we're kicking it back to you. What is your second play of the game in a potentially similar game?
So this actually correlates really nicely with Ben's. I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson over 5.5 receptions. It's plus 100 on DraftKings, so that's where I'm going to be playing it. The Bears play mainly cover 2, which he has almost 40% targets per route run against. And obviously Justin Jefferson's going to be out. So I don't think Addison is refined enough yet to be the number one option for that team. And KJ Osborne is not number one wide receiver archetype himself either. There's some weather concerns in the game, but I think it doesn't remove the option to pass for the Vikings. It just removes the option to pass downfield. Hawkins is going to work more in the 1 to 15-yard range anyway, so that works out pretty nicely for this prop as well. He's had at least 8 targets in almost every game this season except for 1. When he hits 8 targets, he's hit this in 6 of the last 7 with Kirk Cousins, and all 5 wins where he's had at least 8 targets with Kirk Cousins, he's covered this line. And that's actually all I got for this one. Yeah,
that's a pretty good one. I know we're going to be all over that short passing game with the Vikings this week. Guys, Dr. Profit is Dr._Profit_ on Twitter. If you're not one of the 90,000 people following him, you need to right that egregious wrong and give him a follow on the spot. And another egregious wrong that you might need to right is if you are not in the 33rd Team Discord. It's free. It's linked in all the articles on the 33rdteam.com. The 4 of us are in there. Our head of DFS, Jordan Vannick's in there dropping DFS showdown notes throughout the week. Start, sit, trade advice. We've got you. All our player prop bets get posted in the Discord as well, along with write-ups. Most Discords like this, where they give you fantasy, betting, DFS. They generally start at $20, $30 a month. Ours is completely free. Make sure you hop in there. We started this season with 600 members. We're around 3,000 members now. And I think that growth is simply because this is an unmatched value add. Join the Discord. My second play of the day, this is going to feel like a fish line. I don't think I've ever taken a receiving yards over that is this high. But folks, I am taking Cooper Kupp over 86.5 receiving yards. It is only minus 105 on DraftKings. If we look at the 26 games that Cooper Kupp has played with Stafford, which he will be playing with Stafford come Sunday, he's hit this over in 22 of 26 games. That is 85%. He returned last week. He got 12 targets. He caught 8 for 118 yards against the Eagles. Eagles, much better pass defense than the Cardinals. The Cardinals have allowed a wide receiver to go over 86.5 yards in 4 or 5 games this year. I am simply going to bet on old reliable Cooper Kupp to make it 23 of 27 games playing with Stafford to hit this over. Ryan, your third and final prop of the day.
Go with James Cook over 58.5 rushing yards. The Bills are 14.5 point favorites in this game. I think Buffalo can dominate this game in pretty much every conceivable area. Like Ben said, Josh Allen over the top for a big one. But the Giants have given up the second most rushing yards to running backs so far this year. Cook had 123 yards against the Raiders and 98 against Washington in decisive victories for Buffalo earlier in the year. When they blew out Miami, Buffalo did so through the air, so I'm not really worried about Cook's performance there. Plus, another thing that I like is that Cook had -4 rushing yards last week against the Jaguars in London. Not crazy about betting on anyone off a London trip. That's an unwanted variable in general, but I think Buffalo tries to get him going early. I think this is a positive gain script right from the gate, like Cook at this number.
Yeah, this was a play I think all of us we're checking out at some point. Giants continue to be exploitable against running backs. Ryan Reynolds. This is the more famous Ryan Reynolds, and he is Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. If his soccer team loses, make sure you send him angry DMs. He always appreciates each and every one of those. And also ask him about his beautiful wife, Blake Lively. The two of them look so happy together in pictures. Ben, your third and final prop bet of the day.
That was ridiculous, Josh. Hey, speaking of Josh Jacobs, over 21.5 receiving yards. That's my final prop of the day. Josh Jacobs is over this line in 3 of 5. And while only 2 running backs have topped this number versus New England, every team has gone over this when targeting the running backs. And I know that seems cherry-picked. I am not a cherry picker. But the Patriots have faced a ton of running back by committees. We've seen, like in the Eagles, for example, week 1, DeAndre Swift wasn't really involved, but Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott, they combined to top this number. Breece Hall, Dalvin Cook, Michael Carter, they combined to top this number. And the reason that this, I think matters is because Josh Jacobs is legitimately one of the 2 bell cows left, the other being Joe Mixon in the NFL. He owns 74% of Las Vegas's running back targets. That's a number that ranks 5th among running backs. He has a route run on 53% of Las Vegas's dropbacks. That is a number that ranks 7th among all NFL running backs. And believe it or not, I had to double check my code when I pulled this, but Josh Jacobs actually leads all running backs in targets and receiving yards. A big part of that was because of the week 4 game versus the Chargers, where Aiden O'Connell played, but James Conner's still averaging 28 yards per game in the other 4 games, which is higher than this line. New England is allowing the 10th most yards and the 7th most receptions versus running backs. And I 110% buy the narrative that Jimmy G is having a revenge game. He wants to be passing the ball as much as possible. And, Jacobs has a 19% team target share. That's 3rd on the team. I think he might get an extra 1 or 2 receptions just because of that. So taking this line.
I like that one, guys. That's Ben Wolby on Twitter. His projections and write-ups are on the site. He also does a great podcast every Wednesday with Alex Caruso. They have topped 10,000 views on Twitter in back-to-back weeks now for that show. I think you'd actually be hard-pressed to find any fantasy show out there that's even getting 2,000 to 3,000. They get more than 10,000. I believe it's at 12 or 13,000 already for this week. The fastest growing show on Twitter that I have ever seen. So if you want more of Ben's work, if you want to check out some of Alex Caruso's work, that is a great place to go. Streamed. What time do you stream that out on Wednesdays for Fifth Down Fantasy?
1 p.m. Fifth Down Fantasy.
1 p.m. Eastern, folks. And with Ryan, make sure that you're checking out all of his work on the33rdteam.com. His expert picks and predictions. Every Tuesday, he's putting out his power rankings. I know Lions fans were mad that you only had them at number 6. Come on, Lions fans. Again, he had you at number 6. Number 6 is quite good. Check those out. I think they're the best power rankings out there. And I don't even say that as a biased person because I read a lot of them. And Ryan's are the only ones that I trust as someone who also has my own internal rankings. Ryan's, I think, at this point are simply the gold standard. Profit, your third and final prop bet of the day.
So my third prop today is going to be Jaylen Waddle over 59.5 receiving yards. It's on DraftKings, and there's too many reasons to like this. First of all, he had 10 targets last game against New York, and this actually happened to be the only win with Tyreek and Tua where he didn't cover this line. But again, if he's getting 10 targets again, you're expecting him to cover, I'd say 99 times out of 100. That just happened to be the one he didn't. You look at some of the bigger wide receivers that have covered versus Carolina recently. DK Metcalf had 112 yards. Olave had 86. Jefferson had 65. And even Rashid Shaheed covered this line at 63 yards. There's been a lot of injuries in the secondary for Carolina. So that's another thing that I want to target in this game. And the biggest thing for me is that the Panthers run cover 3 at one of the highest rates in the NFL. I think it's second highest. And that's actually Jaylen Waddle's second best coverage from a yards per route run standpoint. And it's not close. He averages over 3.5 yards per route run in the last 2 seasons against cover 3. So he's He's hit this line routinely. He's getting his favorite coverage. He's getting a good matchup. I see no reason why he shouldn't soar over this line.
I like that. Take the Waddle over. And make sure that you go onto the Twitter/X platform and follow Dr._Prophet_ on Twitter/X. He's also in our Discord. Make sure that you're checking out all of his betting content. Unlike Ben, Ryan, and I, who are mainly football people with our content, if you want to bet on basketball, if you want to bet on soccer, Mr. Dr. Prophet is probably going to be your new best friend for those two sports. And also, Underdog Fantasy, promo code 33rd, 100% deposit match up to $100. Make sure you do that. Taylor Swift, we said that for SEO purposes. Let me get my final prop bet of the day in. And one thing I noticed, the producers were actually in my ear and they said, we don't really like this show. There were too many overs given. We want an under. There's been too much positivity. Folks, I've got an under for you to close out the show because we have to dislike some player. I personally, I've known him since grade school. Really don't like the guy. He always bullied me, took my lunch money. We all know that I don't like Irv Smith. And I'm going to take him under 22.5 receiving yards. It's -110 on DraftKings. You might be like, well, 22.5 feels like a low number. Well, let's talk about Irv Smith. Week 1, he had 5 targets. Those 5 targets totaled 2 air yards. They did not let him run a route for real. And he caught 3 of them for 17 yards. That is under this number. Week 2, he had 4 targets. They gave him 40 air yards. They were like, Irv, run down the field. Unfortunately, he could not convert any of his downfield targets because he's not very good at football. And he only caught 2 for 10 yards. He missed weeks 3 and 4 due to injury. Week 5, he ran over 30 routes and they decided not to target him, even though T. Higgins was out. T. Higgins should return this week. Ultimately, if we add up the 3 games, he's run 90 routes this year. On those 90 routes, 5 catches for 27 yards. Oh, I'm feeling pretty good about this one. He's been under this number all 3 games. We look at tight ends versus Seattle. They're 2-2 on this number. Higbee and Sam Laporta were over. Hayden Hurst and Darren Waller were under. I'd say pretty confidently Irv Smith is the worst of that bunch. I expect it to be 2-3 for tight ends versus Seattle under this number. Again, T. Higgins is going to be playing this week. If he couldn't hit this number with T. Higgins out, I don't think he's going to hit this number with T. Higgins in. Irv Smith under 22.5 receiving yards. Folks, we have now given you 12 prop bets in 23 minutes. You'll be hard-pressed to find a better value add than that. Make sure you're following Ryan Reynolds at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. Ben Wolby is at Ben Wolby. Dr. Prophet or William Saad is Dr._Prophet_ on Twitter. From myself, from Ben, from Ryan, from Will, from the 33rd team, from our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Thank you.